There are page limits, and it's going to vary from agency to agency, but kind of the key ones to note for today, your specific aims is 1 page. And the research strategy these days is usually less than a dozen pages for almost every agency. And as you can see, some mechanisms, the R21, I'm doing an R13 now, I got 6 pages. You got to be concise and direct and to the point. It used to be we had 25, but that was a lot of, to be perfectly honest, BS that we would put in to fill up those 25 pages because everybody felt compelled to fill up 25 pages, and the backgrounds would be going on forever and ever, and you get every single gory detail about the methods, and we didn't know it, so, or we didn't need it. What does all this have in common? Any guesses? Anybody online know what any of these have in common? Okay. Those were the original titles of all of these books. Okay. If you've ever read any of them, you know, some of them just like All's Well That Ends Well for War and Peace. I mean, come on. Now, The Dead Undead, I like that one. I think that one could have kind of, you know, grabbed you. But, you know, yeah, look at some of the other ones, and you can see why they probably were told by their publishers change these names. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I would not probably buy that one. So, you know, there is something to be said about the title of something. And the same thing works for grants, okay? At the NIH, it used to be 81 characters. Now we're up to 200 characters. That includes spaces and punctuation, however, okay? And this system will cut off anything longer. So make sure that your title is within 200 characters, because then when we get it, it will literally just be cut off right in the middle of a word. So if it keeps going on, and the important part of your title is after 200 characters, nobody's going to know the important part of your title. Make it catchy if you want. You know, some people create cute acronyms and stuff, or, you know, try to be funny with their titles and so on. But you really want it to be accurately descriptive, okay? According to the NIH and most agencies, any new application has to have a different title from any other project submitted on the same due date, which kind of makes sense, okay, because you don't want them to think it's the same one. Resubmissions or renewals, you usually keep the same title unless you've changed your aim significantly. For example, on a resubmission, suppose you had a technique and what you proposed to do was study it in a cardiac application. And your reviewers came back and said, you got to be kidding. This is never going to fly. Hey, but pancreas would be really cool for this. Go ahead and change your title to reflect it. If you had cardiac in your title and now you're doing pancreas, obviously change your title. For renewals, if you've already gotten 4 years of funding and now you're continuing, you can change your title as well to reflect the fact that you're progressing. But then you want to kind of keep continuity in there. So for example, on my fatigue stuff that I've been doing, my initial grant was called something like Fatigue in Radiology Interpretation. Now it's called Compromised Interpretation, and then something blah, 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 because we slightly changed what we were looking at, okay? Again, why is the title important? One, because if you remember what I said, typically most agencies will send out the list of applications to the reviewers saying, one, do you have a conflict of interest, but two, what is in your area of interest? What do you think you want to review? And they typically put high, medium, low. Most of the time, all we have is the title to go on. So if you want somebody, you know, you're trying to grab somebody's attention to say, hey, I want you to review me, think of a title that's going to attract somebody's attention. Don't make it so convoluted that nobody gets what you're talking about, and don't make it so cute and catchy that people are going to say, what? You know, so accurately descriptive. Short and sweet, because again, that's used in the conflict of interest. It's also used by the Institute in your panel assignment. So if you're going to do, again, something on cardiology, and maybe you wanted to go to a cardiology panel, then you're going to emphasize the cardiology part of it less than the imaging. If you wanted to go to the imaging panel, you're probably going to want to kind of emphasize somehow that has to do with CT, MR, imaging in your title, something like that. So again, think about two things when you're writing your title, well, three things. One, does it really convey what this grant is all about? So I'm going to get the right reviewers. Two, is it going to get me the right panel assignment? And three, are the reviewers that are going to go through and select what they want really going to want to review my grant? Okay. So titles are, surprisingly, for 200 characters, very important. So always think about, a lot of times people, change their titles 10 times. It always helps sometimes also to ask other people in your group, is this a good title? Would you want to review this? Sometimes they say no. Okay. There are usually two, I'm going to call them both abstracts, okay, but they're not quite. Most agencies are going to ask you to do two versions of an abstract, okay. One is the scientific abstract, and the NIH, that's the next one I'll talk about, calls that the summary or the abstract. The other one is, and the Army will call that the technical abstract, okay. The other one is more for public consumption, and the NIH calls it the narrative. The DoD calls it, I think, the public abstract, okay. And other agencies, again, will typically ask you for two. This one is the one that's typically made public, okay, because most agencies, especially the federal government, are accountable to the taxpayers. And so all this information, especially the narrative, is what becomes public information. And anybody can go onto those websites that I talked about last week and scroll through and see, what are my tax dollars going to? And so you don't want to be the one that goes on the nightly news, Golden Fleece Award, because somebody went online and found your funky little narrative that said, oh, I'm going to spend money on something crazy, okay? And government just happened to fund me for it. The narrative for the NIH is usually 2 to 3 sentences describing the relevance of your research to public health, because that's what NIH is all about. DoD, they're going to want something about military relevance in there. Other funding agencies are going to want, if it's American Heart Association, they're going to want to know why it's important for the heart. How, either in the long or short term, is this going to contribute either to our fundamental knowledge about the nature or behavior of living systems, or the application of knowledge to enhancing health, lengthen life, reduce illness and disability. Again, if you are funded, this will be combined with the project summary, usually your abstract, and it will become public information. Okay? And it will go on the NIH website, the DoD website, whatever. Okay? This is the narrative from my recently funded grant on fatigue. Okay, 3 sentences. Concerns have been raised that radiologists' workloads are so demanding that fatigue is leading to increased error rates and missed opportunities for treatment. Boom, that's the problem. Inadequate knowledge about the frequency, cause, and impact of errors, as well as effective methods for error prevention, is a major obstacle for improving healthcare quality. Boom, that's my public health statement. The goal of the proposed research is to determine whether cognitive fatigue can more accurately and fully account for increases in errors in complex radiologic tasks. That's what I'm going to do. 1, 2, 3 sentences. Problem, public health impact, what am I going to do? Okay. And that's typically what they're after, is something like that. This is one for an R13 that I'm writing now. Basically the same thing, 3 sentences. Some of them are a little long, but that's okay. The meeting brings together researchers investigating the process of extracting diagnostic information from medical images to render accurate and efficient diagnoses. That's what it's all about. What about this meeting? Opportunities for advanced interdisciplinary training of young scientists interested in medical image perception research and its relevance to disease prevention and treatment are often quite limited at the university level. That's the problem. What are we doing? Well, since 1997, we've awarded 105 scholarships, having a significant impact on the field by creating opportunities, supportive mentoring at this formative stage in their career to enhance research potential and likelihood of success. This is an R13 grant for a conference. I've told them what the problem is. I've told them what the advantages are, a little bit about our successes in the past, and why this is important to the NIH, because it's building trainees. Okay, so what I'm trying to show here is that your narrative is also a reflection of the grant mechanism. What I write for an R01 will be very different from what I write for an equipment grant or for a conference grant. So tailor these 3 sentences to the mechanism. Okay, but always keeping in mind goal, relevance to the taxpayer, what this grant is going to do. I'm going to fund more scholars. Any questions on the narrative or the title so far? Okay. Summary or abstract. And again, almost every agency is going to want one of these as well. We'll wait a second for that to... So the summary or abstract, at least for the NIH, is 30 lines of text max. And it used to be this little box that we'd have to fill in, and when we were doing paper and typing, it was quite a challenge. But now it's 30 lines max, and usually I recommend, and so does the NIH, Arial 11 is typically what's recommended, either with no break or like I think it's like 1.15 you can use, so don't make it too tight. And what you're supposed to do here is state the broad, long-term objectives and aims, making reference, if you can, to the relevance to the mission of the agency, whether it's the NIH, Heart Association, whatever. A very concise statement of your research design and methods. Basically, how is this going to be informative to others in the same or related fields? You want it understandable to someone who is scientifically or technically literate. In other words, the narrative was more gauged towards a fairly educated public. Okay, I try to write mine really at the most at the high school level for the narrative. The abstract, you're writing more for, say, high school, college level. Okay, you want it to be semi-technical, but not so technical that somebody else who is a scientist but not in your field won't have a clue as to what you're saying. Okay, because again, this also tends to be made public by many agencies. You want to avoid describing past accomplishments. Sometimes there's exceptions to that. I'll show you in a minute. And they also say try to avoid using the first person and be succinct. Okay, again, you only got 30 lines. Again, why is this one important? Same reason. Title, narrative, abstract. These are some of the first things the reviewers are going to read. You're trying to grab their attention. If I can't make it past a 30-line abstract and be vaguely interested in what you're going to tell me about in the next 12 pages, do you really think I'm going to be all that enthused and, go at your thing like, yeah, I want to read this. Yes. Got to remember, most reviewers, especially at the NIH on these panels, have 12 to 15 grants that they have to review. When are they reviewing these? After work? On weekends? What's your mood when you have to do work after work and on weekends? Cranky. Your reviewers are cranky for the most part when they're reviewing these, let's face it. No matter what time you catch them, they're not sitting here at work, with music going in the background. Oh, la-di-da. Oh, I love doing this. Okay? We are time crunched. we're going through these, and a lot of people, believe it or not, gosh, although we're given like 4 weeks, some of them will do them in the past, 2-3 days before they're due. So they're cramming through 12 to 15 in 2 days. Okay, so your job is to make this as enjoyable an experience for the reviewer as possible while getting your ideas across. Okay, so be succinct and so on. I like to divide my abstracts into 5 parts. Okay, you don't have to follow this, but it tends to help me. The first part is sort of an explanation of why this is important and an introduction to the topic. So again, this is the one from my fatigue grant. And as you can see, I tend to try to use 3 mechanisms, and I try not to overuse them though. Bolding, italics, and underlining. If I want to draw the reviewer's attention to things. Not the colors. Oh my God, I wouldn't even bother reading this. If I got this, no, the colors are for illustrative purposes here. Yeah, no, I would just like say, okay, this has got a 9. I don't care what the content is. They can get the Nobel Prize. It's a 9. No, but overuse of these is there's overkill. So be judicious. Again, the first one is sort of a statement of what the problem is. And as you can, what I wanted to get across here was there's a negative impact on diagnostic accuracy. Why? Because people are fatigued. And then the rest of the sentences around there kind of explain a little bit of evidence as to why this is a problem. Okay?
So if we take out the colors.
It's just one straight paragraph.
This is fine.
This is fine, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because I've only kind of highlighted what the key points are. Okay. Then my second statement is really the goal, my short and long-term goal. And I try to keep it both short and long. Specifically, what are we interested in this grant? What am I attacking? I'm attacking, diagnostic errors, cognitive fatigue, complex tasks. My long-term goal is I want to reduce errors. Okay? Why? Because it impacts patient care. Right there. A clear statement of my overall hypothesis. And that's usually one line. Not all the little ones. The next paragraph sort of gets into the methods and the aims. But not boom, boom, boom stated as aims. Just very small, concise statements of what my 3 aims are. Okay? So our first aim, discover ways. Second aim, third aims, relate fatigue to performance. And then my last sentence is essentially my main metric. What am I measuring? Accuracy and efficiency. That's what my outputs, that's my deliverables. So at the end of this grant, if you fund me, that's what you're going to get, is some information on how fatigue impacts accuracy and efficiency. This is just the abstract from that other grant, the R13. Again, 5 sections kind of hitting the same things. What's the point of my meeting? What does MIPS do? It brings together these people. What are we focusing on? Students and young researchers. Second paragraph, who are the hosts? What are we doing? Third paragraph, what's our main emphasis? We got 9 topics. The green paragraph or sentence, kind of like what it's all about. And then the last one is our goals. In a sense, our hypothesis, our specific aims, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Very similar to the first one because it's a different mechanism though. I've just kind of changed the emphasis on some of the things. And again, both are within 30 lines of text. But both have that 5-point structure. And if you see, I mean, this one, the purple and the blue were a little bit longer. My red and orange were kind of short, and the green was a little bit longer. In this one, the emphasis changes slightly differently depending on what I want to get across. And the last thing I wanted to talk about today is the specific aims. Again, because what we're doing is we're grabbing attention. So titles, abstracts, and aims. These are the three things that reviewers are really going to pay attention to. This is what grabs their attention first off. And a lot of times when I talk to other reviewers, what they'll do is they'll go through these three parts, and that's kind of the order in which they review. Oh, this one looks kind of cool. I'm going to review this one first when I'm in a good mood. And the other ones, oh God, I don't want to do this one. I'm going to put it at the bottom of the pile. And when did they get to the bottom of the pile? Okay, some people lie and they say, okay, I'm going to do the worst one first because that's when I'm fresh and I don't want to bias myself. It's like, come on, what do you do? Nobody does that. You put the worst one at the bottom. You leave the yucky food at the end and push it off to the side and pretend to eat it. You know, same thing with the reviews. So again, that's why these three components really are so important, okay? The specific aims, again, across most agencies, but specifically with the NIH, is 1 page max. Okay? And what your goal here is to concisely state the goals of your research, expected outcomes, impact, and so on. It's similar to, but it's not quite the same thing as the abstract. I've seen so many people just take their abstract and plop it on the specific aims page, but instead of shortening the aims, we'll just write them out. Okay, that's good, but it's a little bit more than that, okay? A lot of people will go straight to this page. Okay, this page is really so critical. I think a lot of people spend more time on this than they spend on the 12 to 6 pages sometimes. You know, the abstract and the title sometimes take much more time. And actually a lot of people will write these last. They'll have the aims, but then they'll write the aims page last after they've written everything else. Because this is sort of, I get it now, you know, this is your global vision. And to have that vision, sometimes you have to have written everything else. Okay. You want to list some of your research objectives. So what's your hypothesis? What's your novelty? What's the specific problem you're solving? Does it challenge the existing paradigm or clinical practice? Any critical barriers that this is talking about, or, you know, what new technology are you developing? And again, I break this into paragraphs. Okay? So again, this is straight from my eye strain one. And my first paragraph, I like to have, what's the importance? Why should you give me $1 million to study this? Because that's what you're doing. I mean, that's what you're asking for. You're asking this review committee basically to give you $1 million. Okay? And as my favorite SRO used to say, the scores depend on how willing the reviewers, if they had it, would they go into their own pocket and fund this? And really you are taxpayers. So do you want your tax dollars to go to addressing this problem? It's an interesting way of thinking about it, but that's basically what you're doing, okay? So again, my first paragraph is always, why is this important? Okay, the clinical problem, in this case, it's financial issues, you know, malpractice as a result of errors and so on. So my first paragraph, like I said, always starts out talking about why this problem is important, especially from, again, the public health perspective. Okay, so that's what I have there on my first page. And this is all going to fit into one page. Okay, so importance. And again, judiciously using highlighting, you know, or I mean bolding, underlining, or italics. Okay. My second paragraph is going to say what's new and what's the impact. And this is the only case, this was a continuation. This is, remember I said don't talk about past accomplishments, okay? In this case, when I'm going for a renewal, yeah, I'm going to brag a little bit. And so I'm going to say, yeah, we got 19 publications and 25 presentations from that last $1 million you gave me. We were productive. And I'm going to highlight. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it. I just put the reference. I didn't say what they were. I didn't say what the meetings are. That doesn't matter. That'll be in my reference section. Okay? But overall hypothesis, what is it all about? Again, we're dealing with errors, fatigue, and then highlighting again why this is novel. Well, nobody else is studying it. We're the only group doing this. Impact, clearly it's going to impact patient care. Why? The Institute of Medicine, one of my references, said this is a huge problem. It's impacting patient care. Okay. So what's new? What's the impact? A little bit different from why is it important. Again, why is it important versus what's the impact? Okay. Then I go into my aims and expectations. There's our overall hypothesis. We got 3 aims. What are we going to do? We're going to test, determine, test again. And then I tell you exactly what we're testing and determining. And then the paragraph after that is, what do I expect? Well, in the first aim, we're going to discover ways to help radiologists avoid these types of errors. Second and third aims, we're going to up the ante and we're going to study more complex tasks. What are we going to measure? Accuracy and efficiency. Okay. Reviewer can kind of go through this and, you know, again, I'm a psychologist, okay? I play to people's natural attention mechanisms. The minute you italicize, underline, bold, your eyes are drawn there, okay? Believe it or not, the reviewers are going to probably skim read a lot of what you're writing here. You know, if it really attracts their attention, they're going to read it in depth, but this is not a mystery novel. Okay, they're not wrapped in, oh my God, oh wow, God, every word, I got to read this. Wow, this is great. No, they're going to, okay, overall hypothesis, yeah. Oh, they're going to test, determine, okay, fatigue. Yeah, okay, I get it, you know, because my eyes are drawn to certain things. Okay, so think about that as you're writing as well. Not just the content, but sort of the presentation. Right? So those are sort of the key aspects of grabbing attention, okay, of the reviewers. And again, you don't have to do it this way, but these are, if you're kind of going to this new and you don't have a clue, these are nice kind of templates in a sense that you can follow that will at least get you a step ahead, I think, of somebody who's just kind of wandering around rambling what they're writing. Do we have any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
For the new and